Right, let's not waste any time. I'll get us started. So, welcome everybody to this ELM webinar, where we will be having an evidence-based conversation on diversity, leadership, and the importance of psychological safety. I'm joined by none other than Dr. Jane Bozarth, who is the Learning Guild's Director of Research and author of many books. Um, so I'll keep it very brief and hand over to Jane because there's some very exciting stuff that we're going to be talking about. We will be using chat a lot, so there will be a lot of conversation going on there, I think. So yeah, we'll be posting questions and referring to what's going on the chat as well. Over to you, Jane.
Hi, well, good morning, everyone. It's 9:30 here in the morning, and it's a delight to be with the ELN group. I have spoken live to this group. I was in Glasgow a few years ago under the guidance and coaching of Mr. James McLuckie. I'm guessing a lot of you know him. And so in honor of that, I wore my Scottish Highland cow shirt. It's, because of COVID, nobody ever knows what we're wearing anymore. It's my only chance to show it to anyone. So I'm Jane Bozarth, and before we get going, I want to say a couple of things about my background. If you don't know me, for many years, decades, I was a platform classroom trainer. As they invented electricity and the internet, I became more interested in e-learning, and I moved into that. And then after that, I started moving into using social tools. And my point in talking about that is that I have done a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today. I have been either a trainer for, or a co-worker of, or a participant in a good many of the things I'm going to be talking about. So I'm trying very hard to make it be, a more realistic view and not just an esoteric view of what the research quote unquote says or doesn't say. I try really hard to find ways to make what I work on relevant to real practitioners and to talk about things that are possibilities for things that we can improve or that we can fix or that we can do better with. So I tend to talk about sort of on the ground, 10,000 foot, 5,000 foot views of a lot of the things that I work on and not this 50,000 foot of a perfect world. So I invite you today, please, to chat as much as you like. I want to hear your experiences. I want to know if I'm validating some things that you already know. So let's get going. For right now, I am the Director of Research for the Learning Guild out of California, and I do a lot of different things. My job is to produce a different research report once a month, and sometimes that's a survey. We did a lot of surveys this year on COVID-related issues, and I'll be talking more about that. Sometimes I do a lit review. I occasionally will take on a popular sort of urban myth in our business, like learning styles or something like that. Occasionally I do an interview with some expert in the field, and we post those as video research reports. So we do a number of different things, and these are free with a free membership. So I'll give you a link when we get through today, and I invite you, because I'm going to kind of give you highlights today of 3 of our different projects, sort of key points, but I want you to read the whole reports. I want you to see the rest of the information. I'm not just going to read all the stuff to you. So please do go take a look at those. And again, I hope that what we offer is practical and useful for you. And sometimes it's do this, don't do that, or this is why this doesn't work, do something else instead. And sometimes, because this was my job for so long, I try to talk about ways we can help change the minds and maybe hearts of our stakeholders. Because a lot of times we may even know what we're doing isn't supported by evidence, but we got to answer to bosses or clients or coworkers or HR managers or safety directors, and I have been there. So I'm trying to give you some information that might help with that. And I try along the way to translate some of the language and the depth of the research into plain English, into plain talk. So I hope I have accomplished that. And one of the things I find interesting about my job, I always get surprised when I'm researching. I go in thinking I know a certain amount about things, and I always find out I don't know what I thought I did or as much as I thought I did, or I get something that's a real surprise. So we'll be talking about some of that today. So we're going to cover 3 things that are sort of loosely linked. A diversity report we did a couple of months ago, a report on on what we found when we looked at leaders and how they responded to the COVID era, and what most employees thought about that, what it seemed that managers had done, what went well, what maybe was lacking. And I am looking at mostly through a lens of how that can inform our leadership development efforts. Most of the people I know who are in L&D at some point in their careers work in organizations that are very big on leadership development. Some of you probably are in that boat. Some of you have probably spent a lot of your time on leadership development. It's a huge industry. And I'm looking at where that can inform our work. And then the last thing is I'll take a look at tying all that together by talking about psychological safety, which has been a bigger issue, I think, this past year than it has in other ways. So let me get going. My first, let me get my slides. Oh, we need slides. Hang on. Am I sharing my screen? Let me check.
You should have a share screen at the bottom, and then.
Sorry, I thought I was doing it. Here we go.
Okay.
I thought it didn't look right. Here we go. You good now?
Yep.
Okay. So let's get going. We'll start with talking about diversity. And my interest in this, because we had so many issues, particularly in the United States, around the Black Lives Matter protests and some of our policing issues, I thought it was timely to take a look at what was going on with diversity training. And I worked in the state of North Carolina, USA, the central HR office, and one of our big focus areas was diversity training and equal employment opportunity training. And I saw this past year in the United States a real rush toward delivering diversity and interest in that. So my question is, what is the purpose of diversity training? Why do we say we do it? Why are organizations interested in that? I'm having trouble seeing the chat. Let me see what I can do about that. Oh, there it is. Here we go. It's compliance or it's marketing. It's supposed to make people behave in a more diverse way and not be biased. We want representation of communities we serve. For many people, it is more like a tick box. It's just to achieve compliance. All right, I see that too. In our case, very often in the United States, it's about color. After that, it's about gender. After that, maybe we start looking at other issues like, or color or ethnic origins or things like that, ethnicity. And then it's gender, and then it's other things like sexual orientation, disability awareness, those kinds of things. So, in medicine, what we're seeing here is a shift to a focus on dealing with what we might call other cultures. And there's something called cultural competence that's happening on here. I don't know if it's happening where you are, but there's a lot of focus on working with other populations, working with a homeless population, working with rural versus an urban kind of patient, working with patients who don't have English as a first language here. So my question to you, when we talk about diversity and awareness and not having bias and those kinds of things, I don't know why it's not, I'm not clear why I don't get to see the chat, but we'll do it this way. I'm sorry, I apologize for the back and forth. I'm glad I don't have a lot of secrets on my slides. When I ask, what it is we want to accomplish, what behavior do we want to see when we're talking about being more diverse, being less biased? What is the behavior change that you want? Describe that behavior to me. And yes, some of you I see in chat are talking about, we just do stuff for legality. We do things because there's been a complaint. We do things because we're trying to avoid a complaint, right? Okay, I'm getting advice about the slides. We'll work on that. We want appreciation of the range. We want more tolerance and representation. Those are outcomes. Those are not behaviors. What behavior? If you were to make a video of Jane being less biased, or Jane showing that she appreciates diversity, what is that video going to show? I want a video of people stopping and being reflective. All right, seeing more use of gender inclusive language, seeing an actual change in things like number of people hired who go into a certain category, number of people interviewed. All right, do you see the difference, the distinction I'm making? I think many, many times in these conversations about diversity, we have a very big, broad idea, but we have a really hard time pinning down exactly what that's going to mean, all right? Including everyone in a conversation. Being a supporter, tackling, responding to microaggressions. All right, I think, you know, people are well-intended. I don't mean to say that they aren't. I don't mean to say that they aren't, but I think that sometimes we are not very good at identifying exactly what it is we're after, right? So thinking about the behavior change that you actually want and thinking about what you actually want to address, I think is critical. When we talk about doing diversity training, one of the things we run into is basing it on social identity theory, all right? That we all understand ourselves and we value ourselves in relation to the social groups we belong to the family, to the social class, to the academic class, to the clubs we are in, the neighborhoods we live in, the colors we are, the people we love, whatever, the social groups we belong to, and we have preferences for one group over another. I mean, you see people fight over whether you're a fan of Game of Thrones or not here. I mean, groups are sometimes very, very small, or they're very specific. So, you know, we tend to like people from our own group better than we like people from other groups. And one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting because of this, when I was reading through the literature, and there's a mountain of literature on diversity, academic, trade, everywhere. Everybody talks about diversity. But the word that I kept running into that I never see anywhere else is the word backlash. That there's so much pushback that people feel very singled out, that people feel that the training is being used as punishment, that people feel that that they're being told that they're bad and they have to change. People become defensive. And the truth is, in my life, I have seen it used that way. I've seen it used as punishment. I've seen it used as punitive. I've seen it used as retaliatory. And you sit people in a chair and yell at them that they're bad, or tell them that they're bad, or that their social group is not what they believe it is. You know, you're going to get pushback. And the problem with that, you know, is that people certainly aren't going to change once they feel that way. So, you know, I think we need to remember in our role as L&D, we're not trying to do harm, even if we are well-intended, that maybe we can. There's a good deal of longitudinal research about diversity and diversity efforts. Much of it is focused on color, on ethnicity, but the research found that in many cases, after implementing compulsory diversity training, the numbers of some demographic groups actually went down. There was such pushback against the ideas that it undermined the effort to increase representation, when you know that was the opposite of what we were trying to achieve. So, you know, again, thinking about the behavior you want to see and how we get to that, I think is part of our challenge. But people are going to always going to tend to elaborate their reasons to defend their prejudices, and the attempts to discredit what somebody believes is a problem. So when we look at what works and what doesn't, the first thing that and I mean literally all the literature, generally when you're reading through this stuff, you find some argument among researchers. There's this school or that school or this point of view or that. There really is none. It's without conflict, that everyone says the biggest problem with diversity training is making it mandatory. People will push back against that. It just makes them dig in a little bit harder. Nobody likes to be forced to do anything. I would suggest just calling it something else. Call it communication guidelines, or call it better teamwork, or call it, a personal growth thing like better listening skills, or anything but diverse. Don't call it diversity training. Don't make it mandatory. And watch out for, like I said, stereotype discrediting. When you're just trying to tell people what they think is wrong, and prove to them that millennials aren't like this, and short people aren't like that, and people of a certain religious faith aren't like that, they tend to just dig in more. So talking about where we are alike and what we share, rather than how we are different and convincing you we're not, is typically a more useful approach. I have a question for you. I've made a big speech about not making it mandatory. How do we make something mandatory without saying it's mandatory? Intersectionality, pronoun use, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat now. I think more compassion is great, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. I'm getting to that when we talk about the leadership stuff. How do you make something mandatory? Because we're all having to do that. You've got other stuff that's mandatory. You've got probably safety, compliance, regulation stuff. How do we make something mandatory without forcing people? Joan says incentivize people. So reward them for coming. People love certificates. People love stuff. Incentivize them. Make it part of some ladder. Make it part of contributing to some bigger goal. Give badges. Like I said, just call it something else that will help. I had good luck with it. Yeah, make it a gateway to something they really want. Now, I had really good luck in my own career with building it into other things. Like we had if you wanted to be in a supervisory position, there was required training for that, and everybody accepted that if you're going to a new job role. And we just made it one of the modules. It was just one more thing that was required as part of a bigger package that nobody was balking against, right? Make it part of, build it into other programs, build some work on this into your recruiting and hiring and interviewing training, build some of this into communication skills, build it in, and that's going to bring me to another point, build it into other programs I find helpful. I will tell you one thing I did, I learned this with another program, which required an application process. Tell people they can't come. Tell people they don't qualify to attend your diversity training. They will beat down the door. It's terrible. I know it's manipulative. I'm sorry, but it worked. It did work. Telling people they can't come. It's not available to you right now. We'll let you know. We'll let you know when you can come. And all of a sudden they can't get enough of it. So thinking about ways that we can make it mandatory without making it mandatory is I think one of the things that we can step up to. But one of the big researchers is named Kalev. He's one of the ones that did so much of the longitudinal research, and he says you might as well just not do it based on what we know about the outcome. So here is the next thing though I want to say about that. When I got through with my big literature review of the mountain of stuff on diversity, in the end, this is what it said. And I'm thinking, well, this is what we say about all the training we do. We wish everything we did had organizational buy-in. We wish everything we did was a big, robust initiative that wasn't just a half day or a whole day workshop. We want a lot of the things we teach to have subsequent feedback and coaching, and we want a lot of evaluation to see if behavior has changed, not just whether people like it. So I think we know all this already. We just need to figure out how to make it happen a little bit. But just rolling out a half day of awareness where everyone agrees that we have biases and we should all be better, kumbaya. The song is Kumbaya here in the States, isn't enough. And my suggestion for some of that is, like I said, trying to build diversity stuff into other things that we do and making it part of sort of a bigger the bigger initiatives that we run, but it puts us up against the same problem we've always had. But this is the thing I really want to get to before we move on. And Joan, I don't think has heard this because it had not happened yet when she and I talked about this in October. Right after, because this is how the world works, right after I released the diversity report, a study came out from the New York Police Department on anti-bias training, which is pretty much what we're talking about here. And the report said they had done this awareness training to make everybody less biased, and it was awareness, and they took the test and they all agreed and everybody loved the program and the donuts program, and you know the story. The training was fine, according to everybody who attended it, and then they sent the police officers back on the street and they saw absolutely no change in behavior. They were measuring things like had the number of, the part of the initial problem was they were pulling over Black male drivers in disproportionate numbers, and that did not get any better at all. Now, as people in the training business, we know there are a lot of things that stand between a performer and performance. I mean, there's other stuff that goes on, but the fact of the matter was they did the training, they had a pre-test, they had a post-test, there was no improvement, and the trainers just all said, oh, we're going to keep doing it. We think, well, they're more aware. That's bound to be a good thing. And I think that's one of the things that can get us in trouble in this business is just disregarding blatant data and pressing on. My guess is there are people who love to do diversity training and they're good at it and it's their thing and they're just going to keep right on. So I will ask you what you say about that in chat about just disregarding. We know it doesn't work, but we don't really care. We're going to do it anyway because we think it's good. You can have the slides, Viv, but I'd rather you read the reports, and I'm going to give you a link to that. It's the same information. I'm not introducing anything new here that's not in those, except what I just said. But yeah, tick box won't help at all. But do you know what I mean? This thing of don't you do stuff you suspect it's not great, but you kind of like doing it. I mean, haven't you seen that happen in training? Yeah. The thing is, the management of the trainers also agreed. They're like, oh well, but it can't hurt. But it's not healthy. Again, I think this was a case where a bunch of police officers got sent to, I think it was a day of awareness training. And I don't think it's reasonable to think that is going to get much of a behavior change. Back to our original point. I think that everybody in these things would probably agree, yeah, we've got some biases. Yeah, that's terrible. We'll work on it. But then you go right back into your day-to-day work and things don't really change. So I think that we can learn from that a little bit. And you need practice and you need ongoing training. Well, yeah, and that Joan is making a point about peer pressure. Back to my point, we know that there are many things that get between a performer and what actually happens on the top, between what they learn in training and trying to go back and put it into practice. My biggest problem with that in my career, apart from the peer pressure, was just managers who didn't support what we had done in training that they wanted the employees to attend. It drove me kind of crazy. Well, I'm the way I am now. Okay, we need to move on. We got other stuff to talk about today. The next thing that that we were looking at, we did several, like I told you, we did several surveys on COVID and what was happening in the age of COVID. And most of those surveys, we were asking whether people had moved things online. Did they plan to stay online? What were their plans for next year? Had they moved to remote work? We ask a lot of that kind of stuff, just L&D in general, but there was always an opportunity for some open text comments. I like to give people a comment. And there were a lot of comments about, which kind of surprised me, about how well people felt their management had done. And usually when you ask people to say anything, they have complaints. So I went and did what I called a research roundup. There was a lot of research coming out, survey data from big places like McKinsey and Gallup, surveying what leadership had done to respond to the COVID crisis. And while there was some that was at the very highest level, like the CEO level and big strategic decisions, there was also a lot about sort of the frontline managers, the middle managers, the people sort of making tactical day-to-day decisions, not so much the sweeping huge changes. And I basically went and looked at all of that. I looked at everything I could find that seemed to address those kinds of things. And the good news was that people mostly felt their management had done a really good job. They felt that management had tried to accommodate people. They felt that management was in fact worried about their well-being, that they were trying their best to keep the business running. But out of almost 500,000 respondents, Quantum found that almost 9 in 10 employees felt management had done a good job. So, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised by that, but I thought it was very good news. And I thought so much of the research, the focus was that the managers had been so concerned about the human side of things, about the well-being of people, about the stress level of their people, about making sure their people were safe. If people were going home to work, they were concerned about the setup for that. If people had to stay, and this was a big problem, people had to stay in the environment, like hospital workers or assembly line workers, people who could not be sent home, about how hard management worked to make sure the environment was safe for them. It was really quite, it was kind of a feel-good project to work on, and I didn't really see that coming. It was a really positive experience. So what the surveys were looking at, I was trying to find some surveys that were looking at similar things. So what I did land on, where we could see data from more than just one source, was how the manager had responded, to what effect that had on engagement or morale, which I know are nebulous ideas, but that's what they were asking about. Whether employee satisfaction had gone up or down, whether productivity had gone up or down, whether the work environment was perceived to be better or had declined. So I was looking across at those things, and again, across the board, the reports were that everything had either held steady or had improved, that people were pretty happy, that people were pretty satisfied, that they felt motivated. They were worried about the COVID situation, but they were doing okay. So let me ask you, what do you think mattered to these employees who remained engaged and productive and satisfied and had high morale? What do you think the surveys said mattered to them? Feeling trusted? Yeah, you know, this shifted. People who had been hesitant to allow remote work had to just kind of a lot of people had to just get over a lot of stuff, right? Good communication. We're talking about what? Being listened to, regular contact, people paying attention to them. Aren't these the things we teach all the time in leadership development programs? Building trust, building better communication. And it turned out they were doing pretty well. So let's talk about the things that the surveys did show, and what L&D can do, maybe that you know, things that are in our control and things that we could look at when we're talking about our own leadership development programs. The first things were the managers' flexibility and empathy. That managers were willing to make a lot of accommodations, that they were willing to adjust work hours, adjust work locations, they were willing to try new things, they were willing to flex where they could, and that they were very empathetic. And again, you know, these are things as L&D practitioners we can work on. We can do some of the things. And one of my favorite examples of flexibility actually did not come from the COVID era. I saw this a couple of years ago. The state I live in is on the coast of the United States. I'm on the East Coast, and it's prone to hurricanes. I am pretty far inland, so they don't affect me, but where I grew up was on the coast, and we have pretty bad storms. And during Hurricane Florence, and before I show you what I'm about to show you, I want you to give some thought to this. I'm talking about a military organization, one of the most bureaucratic organizations on earth, that is also a hospital. And during Hurricane Florence, they set aside a hallway so that staff could bring their pets in. This is the ultimate example of flexibility and empathy, because the one thing is that people were worried about what was going on at home, and it was distracting them, and they didn't want to be at work because of it. So for a military hospital to be able to flex like this, I think is pretty much a testament to how much any of us, any business should be able to flex. All right. Some other things that we can address. We can address flexibility and empathy, but also, as you all were saying, we've got communication and listening. Managing disinformation turned out to be a big issue, and I think we're probably more aware of that these days because of some of the stuff happening with politics and social media lately, particularly here. But managing the rumors, managing the news, being keeping a finger on the pulse of the rumor mill. And I don't know, maybe that's not something we pay much attention to in training. We're working in leadership development, not just communicating clearly, but also managing things that are wrong, because you have seen, it's very easy to send people into a panic. And a little bit of misinformation can cause a lot of damage. Stress management for both the workers and the managers turned out to be a huge issue. Now, some of you mentioned something like that in the chat, that understanding how to sort of know what's going on. But a manager panicking, that tends to trickle down. Being able for a manager to manage their own stress and then to be able to help manage stress of workers is really critical. And I think that is an area clearly in the realm of learning and development. It's something lots of organizations have done for years, and most trainers I know somewhere in their careers have had to have done some kind of stress management work and help with managing remote workers. So these are all things I think for those of us who are in the business can do some work with. Let's see what's going on. Let's see, had to cope with so much more than doing their own job. A good leader can put themselves in the worker's shoes. And I think that did happen. The managers were dealing with it too. The managers were having to work from home. The managers suddenly were trying to homeschool 6-year-olds while they did their job, right? People were largely in the same boat, right? Right, being more empathetic. But any of you in L&D who have had any interest in the recent conversations about learning experience design, a great deal of that is focused on empathy. Also on design thinking is focused on empathy. So I think there's a lot of stuff for us. And I would also say, to the point that you all are making about everybody being in the same boat or managers being in the same boat, I think we have excellent fodder now for case studies and simulations and scenarios that will sustain it. We can use this for a long time. Because they will remember what this was like. They did experience it right along with the workers. I will say a couple of things came up that it wasn't necessarily a deficit or a negative, but there was some data that said there were a few things they felt managers could be better at. And one of them is the managers were flexible if it was their own idea. The managers were not always great about listening to employee suggestions. And some people came up with some very creative responses to staying in business during COVID. I mean, here we saw, everybody went to curbside pickup for stuff, but we also saw restaurants selling meal kits. You can just go by Chipotle and get a taco box where they get all the ingredients and you can take it home. We saw my local gym started renting out equipment because you couldn't go in, so they started renting the stuff out. So, really creative answers to some problems. The military hospital with the hallway for the pets. But the research, and it's just it wasn't a huge finding, just said that maybe managers could be more open to employee suggestions. And a number of people said, who is taking care of the managers? Is anybody monitoring their stress level? Is anybody keeping an eye on how they're doing? And I think that's a valid point, making sure when we talk about all this stress, that they're under it too. And to the point that I saw somebody make in chat, if they're burnt out and unmotivated, that is of course going to affect how their workers respond. And somebody's just talking about the ergonomics of being home with nothing but a laptop. I had someone in another survey we did recently say that they wish that there was more understanding of what people really need at home. He was having to pay for upgraded internet at home on his own, but meantime he had an expensive company phone that he never really used. So figuring out how they could make some trade-offs. But I thought overall it was very positive, and I thought it was really good news. I don't know that I expected it would be awful, but I certainly didn't expect to read out of 500,000 people that 90% of them thought management had done a good job. You don't hear that stuff. So I thought that was really Interesting. So the last thing, and it kind of ties all this together, is the research report last month on psychological safety. And that ties into the diversity when we're talking about people who feel threatened by the content, who feel that the core of their beliefs and understanding and who they are is being challenged. The problem of people feeling like they are, in this case, literally unsafe, working in a situation where their safety is at risk, where there's so much change. The business is changing, the business future is uncertain, their work arrangements are changing, all of that stuff. So psychological safety seemed like a timely thing. And I will just ask all of you, when we talk about psychological safety, when I think about it for L&D, I think about a lot of the research talks about things like simulations, working with facilitators, people facilitating things like diversity workshops or team building workshops, that kind of stuff. But it also affects how people engage at work, how people engage with their team, how they collaborate. So I wanted to take kind of a look at that. And the sort of the last word on most things psychological safety is a woman from Harvard. Her name's Amy Edmondson. If you read any of the safety literature, you will run across her. But she describes this as a climate in which learners feel comfortable to be present and to engage in behaviors. And I'm just going to ask you quickly, have you ever been in a situation, perhaps as a school child, perhaps as an adult, where you've been in a training or an instructional situation where you felt threatened or humiliated or mocked or ashamed? Has that ever happened? Well, and honestly, I think in the case, to get to your point while they answer that, in the case of the person who described it, said there needed to be more communication about the specifics of that. For instance, and I think sometimes employees don't always take initiative to say, look, I don't really need this phone, but what I do need is an internet upgrade. I think they're working on this thing. My question is, have you ever been in a training situation? And let me ask it differently. Have you ever been in a training situation where you feel you've seen someone else, another participant, embarrassed or put down or put on the spot? And I can't believe you never had that happen when you were a kid. I remember now a day in about the 7th grade, which was a long time ago now, the teacher making fun of a kid in the class who couldn't say her R's. Thoughtless little things. It doesn't have to be overt, Lord of the Flies. It's just, a time, right, when a teacher made fun of a child. Have you ever been criticized by a boss in public or too harshly, unnecessarily harshly? Have you ever seen somebody getting bullied and the adults in the situation or the managers should have stepped in and they didn't? What about those diversity scenarios where you said people being more inclusive in meetings? Yeah, pointing out somebody's accent, all of those things damper someone's interest in and enthusiasm for participating in learning, and they're not going to learn anything. What they're going to remember is that in the 7th grade, that woman couldn't, made fun of the kid who couldn't say her R's. I don't even remember what the context was, but I remember that. It's also a great way to get an entire class to turn on you. As a leader, taking a role play too far, I've seen that too. So those kinds of things, when you're threatened, or you feel shamed, people are going to try to avoid those behaviors. People are going to try to stay away from it. And I will say, because a good chunk of my career the last 15 years was about e-learning, very often asynchronous tutorial sorts of things, click along sorts of courses. They weren't necessarily in a public setting. I mean, it's a learner alone with a computer, but I saw these things. These things happened. The thing on the left was one of the diversity trainers who brought me a slide deck and wanted me to help it become quote unquote e-learning, make it be e-learning. This was an introduction to an open book test about equal employment opportunity law. Why do you need to tell adults not to cheat on an open book test? And why would you think that they would? And isn't that kind of insulting to a 50-year-old manager? I think that probably they thought this was funny, but it's not. It was kind of like, really? The item on the right, I love because they got every answer wrong. Wrong is written in giant capital letters with exclamation points. And then the button says play more because you know they're going to be motivated to do that. This was actually dummied over from a map quiz I saw for 5th graders, like 10-year-olds, who in front of their peers are going to sit there and have a screen that says wrong, wrong, wrong 12 times and then tell them to play more. I mean, it's silly things that we maybe don't give much thought to, but once the learner is ashamed or feels put down or feels insulted, you're shutting them off. One of the solutions to this is what the literature calls consequence-based feedback. So rather, the learner makes a choice, say they're in a retail setting and the learner makes a choice, rather than get this giant, no, that's wrong, incorrect, bad answer, rather than get any of those, you just say, you give them the consequence for their choice. The customer walks away. The customer asks to speak to your boss. The customer buys the product, right? So rather than this right, wrong thing, just say, well, this is the outcome you got. So that's one way to address some of that when we talk about online learning, when we talk about e-learning. But Edmondson did a really interesting study. She took a look at high-performing and low-performing teams and did a comparison of how many mistakes they made. So you know what she was expecting to find, right? And if you know the answer to this, don't spill it. If you're going to look at how many mistakes are made, who would make the most, the high-performing teams or the lowest? Sure. I mean, it's the assumption all of us would make, is that the high-performing team would do better, but that's not what Edmondson found. She found that the high-performing teams made more mistakes, more reported errors than the lower performing teams. Why do you think? And I want you to think about it in context of what I just said about psychological safety. The reported errors, right? So the high performing teams were more likely to report errors. Have you ever worked with people who hid stuff? Who swept it under the carpet? Have you ever worked with people who did not know they'd made errors? Because I've been there. They didn't even know what they were doing wasn't right. Right, so the high performing teams felt safer about acknowledging, reporting, dealing with the mistakes they were making than the lower team is. So it being in a psychologically safe setting makes people less self-conscious. It makes them feeling less like they have to just project this crazy feeling of competence, even if there's not competence. I would again point to some political situations with that of recent years. This projection that you know exactly what you're doing, you're making no mistakes, well, that hides things that are often serious that we could deal with better if we surface them earlier on, so that people can engage with the task at hand. Now, here's the better part of this. People who feel psychologically safe in an environment, that tends to have a self-reinforcing nature. When people feel psychologically safe, it tends to spread. It spreads across teams, it spreads across work units. It tends to help build community. So it makes people, it's more of a networked process than just an individual feeling safe. You can have sort of a network community, interdependent product of safety if everyone is feeling that way. So trying to convey that across a team. So when we look at psychological safety and building psychologically safe environments, it helps influence individual learning as well as group learning, like you saw with the Edmondson stuff. It helps, and this is a big topic of mine. One of my challenges in working with state government, because we had such a big workforce, and so many people had been there so long, and we had all these people walking around with stuff in their heads that they never thought to share with anybody else till the day they retired, and then we were all in a panic. It helps us share tacit knowledge. It helps people contribute ideas. It helps them feel like they are participants in a shared enterprise and not just these individuals always flying alone. It helps them speak up with their suggestions for what we might do differently, and it encourages them to take initiative. And it ties back to what we saw with the supervisor study, where about the only failing people cited that the managers, or something they could do better, was listening to the ideas the employees generated. So making it safer for them, making the managers more likely to listen, not going in with this sort of finger wagging attitude about the diversity training. All of those things can help quite a bit. Now, one of the things that came up for those of you who are involved, I know this is the e-learning network, but I feel it's safe to assume many of you, or you have organizations who are involved and still in facilitated events like team building or leadership or things that involve case studies or role plays, whether that's happening virtually, whether that happens in a traditional classroom. One of the things we are not paying much attention to these days, in my view, is facilitation skills. I watched everybody rush to get their material online this year, to get it into Zoom or into some other platform like this. And they were all busy, talking about icebreakers and converting their slides. And I saw a lot of trainers not getting much help moving from a traditional setting to this one. And it is a different environment. You do need to learn to do things a little bit differently here. But this was one of the studies that I read talked about the participants. The psychological safety was just not there if they felt that the facilitators weren't competent, or they didn't trust them, or they perceived that they were unqualified or unprepared, and it undercuts the success of the experience. So strong facilitator skills are critical to psychological safety. And here are some of the traits that we see, or the skills that those people have. Lord of the Flies. I have been with facilitators who they knew their content, but they didn't know how to manage the people they wanted to do the role play or the whatever they were doing, ropes course or whatever. I have seen them when challenged at all, they just push back and they don't engage very well. I have seen them just facilitate badly. One of my own worst ones was, again, one of the diversity trainers, which I'm sorry to pick on them. I just had it on my mind because I was writing the report. She was doing a quiz on facts about employment law or something. And she had it set up like a Jeopardy game, except instead of buzzers, there was like a school bell, one of the things you slap on top and it chimes. She was so concerned about them playing by the rules and who hit the bell first and all of the logistics of it. She didn't have very good facilitation skills. She's very attached to her content. She was defensive about her content, but she didn't facilitate this thing well. So she was so concerned about the actual logistics of the game. It went past her that they had missed every single question they answered. They had not gotten anything right after a day of training on this stuff. So, a bad facilitator can really hurt a bad experience. That was a chance for her to fix things, but instead she made them mad. She got the group frustrated watching her be mean to people who weren't hitting the bell right. It was just a disaster. So, making sure, if we want to do experiential learning, fabulous, but make sure the people who are facilitating that know what they're doing. We need to train them in not just the content, but in how to manage people. I mean, one of you said earlier you saw a role play going badly. Somebody went too far. The facilitator is supposed to know how to manage that, right? So, looking at that. So what the research says about creating psychologically safe environments for learning, to make sure the environment is controlled, to make sure people know they're not actually going to die, they're not actually going to fall off the thing, that they're not going to be humiliated in front of their peer, that this is a predictable experience. That there's induction, that people understand what the setup is, that people understand how they're to be evaluated on it, not throwing people in just cold to these unfamiliar experiences, which is easy enough for us to do. We can do this. The other thing is to be sure we engage in formative evaluation. And this is, again, if you're using a live facilitator, or if you've got somebody in an asynchronous situation, not just waiting till the end to give a summative grade, to let people know how they're doing along the way. I'm trying to remember who said it, but there's a researcher who said, summative evaluation is tasting the soup after it's finished, but formative evaluation is tasting the soup as you go and seasoning and as you change. So I think we're going to be doing better with that now that we have more opportunities for adaptive learning and personalized learning. But the thing about everything resting on this final single grade, we've all probably felt the stress of that. And it doesn't really help develop new behavior or new or embrace new ideas. And finally, people feel that their confidentiality is respected and that there's trust. We may not always control that between an employee and a worker, but we can certainly work on making our own environments feel that way and help. Will we talk like things about like the learner, diversity training and the leadership training, you know, helping to work on strategies for developing that and stressing the importance of that. Quickly, one last thing was a lot of this interest in this came up because we were suddenly moving to virtual environments, and there were some concerns about psychological safety there, because suddenly we were exposed in different ways, and for many of us, our homes were in the background, our kids and our dogs were in the picture, and you know, what the research came up with here is things we already knew about psychological safety in general, but to be sure in these environments that people feel included, that people feel listened to, people feel they're being acknowledged. If you're doing things like the role plays or the case studies or in-depth conversation, use the breakout rooms, give people private spaces to talk, have rules about confidentiality, and that kind of thing. I thought I did explain formative versus summative evaluation. I can't see who said that. Doing sort of taste as you go is Joan. Okay. But the key thing with a couple of key things when we talk about the psychological safety issue is it's critical for a person to feel psychologically safe in order to feel that they are capable of change. And I would argue that that is what learning is changing and feeling that you can and want to. So we got to have that in place. And the other thing is a lot of companies glom on to some huge initiative. They want to do Agile, they want to do Six Sigma, they want to do design thinking, or they want to do design sprints or that kind of stuff. And all of those things are well and good, but nothing is going to work if the interpersonal dynamics aren't taken care of. And you all know that. I mean, if we don't have people willing to work together and talk to each other in the first place, there is no product we can buy and overlay on that that's going to change it. We gotta get at the root of things first. So let's get people off of mute if they want to. I didn't realize people were clamoring to talk. I'm happy to have that. So some common themes for today, maybe we can discuss those for a minute. Meantime, I will tell you how to get to the research reports. If you go to learningguild.com, go to the research library, they're all free. You just have to have a membership so we can track you down the list of stuff. It's not really a big deal, but it's free. So let's talk a little bit about about what you saw today, where you saw commonalities. And sometimes I see comments like that. I see them after I've just said something that is about the comment. The backgrounds, you know, that's been an issue, especially with children, with school children who don't want people to see where they live, you know, so I agree. The question of recording the virtual meeting and what you do afterward, you know, whether that's going to be made public. I have sometimes been surprised when I've done something like this and it was never discussed, but suddenly it's on YouTube and I don't know that I ever said that was okay, or something like that. Also, if people take screenshots, I saw people for a long time, they like to take screenshots of Zoom meetings. You need to ask people if that's okay, especially if you're going to, you know, blast it across the world. What else? Authenticity, everybody's expensive living. Are my ukuleles making you jealous? I have more. I have others. People have right to privacy. Since I do have an audience largely from the UK, this is one of my ukuleles. This is some custom inlay. That's a corgi chasing sheep. And I go to the UK all the time, or I used to in the before times, and I never see corgis when I'm there. I see Scotties when I'm in London. I'm okay. Yes, I'm okay with you putting on YouTube. I was just making a comment. What else is going on in chat? I'm trying to scroll up. So let me put that link in chat. It's learningguild.com. And I see that Joan has put a lot of other resources for you here, links to Edmondson. Links to other stuff. So what are some common themes? I mean, where did you see diversity, leadership, and psychological safety tying together? I saw tie-ins, but I was trying not to beat you too hard over the head. Most importantly, did you have a good time today? Because that's all that really matters, isn't it? Did you feel psychologically safe? I have been to Buckingham Palace, but the corgis weren't out that day. You can certainly buy some corgi stuff there. I've been to Buckingham Palace. I was trying to get the Queen to come out and play Cards Against Humanity with me one night, but she wasn't having it.
Well, the chat is definitely taking a life on its own there, Jane, and a lot of good contribution, definitely.
Well, I want to, Joan came to one of the Guild events a couple of months ago. We did our DevLearn event, is usually in Las Vegas in the fall. And we haven't got many folks from your side of the pond, by the way. But this year, because of the COVID situation, we certainly couldn't travel, and not to a casino. Oh my goodness, the germs. So we did it virtually, and Joan was there and saw the diversity, I think, presentation. And so I appreciate her showing so much interest in this. Evidence-based practice is a challenge in our business for a number of reasons. So I believe she's the one that brought me in for this today, or set the ball rolling. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. Thanks for having me, everybody. It's still morning here, so everybody have a great rest of your day and enjoy.